Remember this video? Okay, sure, it was just a silly idea, but running out of horizontal screen space can be a real concern depending on how many keys there are. Let's go back to 60 pixels and keep adding additional key counts until we use all of the horizontal space. And right when we get around the 16 mark is where we really have issues. If this were a 5x4 monitor, that number would be even smaller. Now obviously, we can lower the column width, but there's another attribute of the skin config that we can modify. Column spacing is normally used to create artificial stage gaps if you're playing something like DP or easy to act style maps, but this number can also go into the negatives. The idea here is that you would overlap these 4 columns with these 4, have these different layers use different colors to distinguish what level they're on, giving yourself a screen usage reduction of 55%. Sounds great, right? Maybe. There's 2 major concerns with the style of skinning: player limitations and limitations within OSU itself. Even though you won't get any error messages or warnings changing up these numbers, there are some hard-coded limitations that you just cannot modify past for some reason. Column sizes are locked between 5 and 100, and the number of spacing that you're allowed to set is also locked at 100. You also can only add spacing between adjacent columns, and what I basically mean by that is that you couldn't skin or set keys to be something like 4 3 2 1 or 3 4 1 2. It'll essentially stop before it goes behind or ahead of the following column. The only way you can skin 18 key to be in this sort of 4 up 4 down style is by also modifying the column size to fit within the allowable amount of column spacing. You end up with the full skin taking up only about this much screen space, which is incredibly tiny on most monitors, and this is where we start to get into some of the player limitations of such reading style. The main benefit you get from something like this, which is a more narrow field of reading, is immediately overshadowed by the massive skill curve to even begin playing like this. As mentioned, the notes being this small makes it a challenge if you're used to a more general size, but this can be compensated with Windows Magnifier. There may be some visual lag with this, but when I used it for another game, I couldn't really feel anything. And distinguishing colors when they're all within one column is yet another skill curve. Taiko players essentially already do this in their mode, but this would be like Taiko reading split between 8 different columns at the same time. Increase the map's difficulty past 2.5 stars, and maps would require some serious reading ability. Lastly, there's patterns like this that could occur. Chords that require the same finger but are split between the 2 islands. These fat finger patterns usually won't appear in lower star maps, but in a more difficult context, some mappers do like using these. The uses of transparency would allow for different hues to blend, but that would create yet another color players would have to associate for a unique finger movement. Hugged had his skin set up like this so that there's a little bit of staggering to the overlap. This lets each layer be seen without any ambiguity of the colors mixing. I'm not sure if this is due to OSU's skinning limitations or if this was a cosmetic choice, but either way, the slight disorganization leads to patterns standing out more easily. One of the advantages to unique skinning concepts like this is that we as players can create map designs around any visual constraints that are brought upon with set skin. 18 key maps are already created in this sort of up-down island nature, but mappers could probably play into this even more and have long stretches of the map where you're really not switching between the islands so often. In this case, the map will feel more like 10 key times 2 or some different thing, but I doubt things would develop that far and affect 18 key mapping to this extent. There is, however, another overlap layout that does require distinct mapping and has caught on a bit, and that's 666 key. Similar to the previous layout, this one has a top, middle, and bottom layer in which the player would switch between while playing. Because we have those same skin issues mentioned earlier about column size and spacing, we can't exactly use a standard 18 key layout as there wouldn't be enough allowable space to overlap. So instead, the keybinds are set in a way so that each overlap is the very next note. This allows for column sizes to be pretty much anything within the limitation. Since the layouts are different, you wouldn't be able to play normal 18 key maps like this, as patterns between the 2 layouts would translate to entirely different physical movements. So try not to think of this as another potential reading advantage, but more like a new different way of playing with 18 inputs. I did want to briefly mention scratch key modes and double play as it pertains to overlap skins. With the scratch lanes, I have seen some skins overlap these across the entire playfield side. This is done to signify that above or below each bind is an additional bind that would activate the scratch lane. Of course, all of this isn't possible within OSU, so don't worry about that one too much. For 18 key double play, you can see how the original style of skin has wider and shorter column lanes. You know, I always used to wonder about this and why it was even like this. It just looks messy and confusing to have arbitrarily sized columns like that. But hold on, look closely. It kinda resembles a piano. Even the controller is reminiscent of the black and white keys, albeit enlarged. Looking at older versions of this game, and you can further see how it's based on the piano keys. The upper and lower lanes seem to be the same size though, but they did overlap. This is how most 24 key skins are, which is really intuitive once you start putting it into the perspective of the piano, and it's really useful. Now, my thinking here is that if you got really good with 24 key reading, or even just 14 key, like surely your reading ability of these two would translate between one another. Basically, having your skin set up like this, which is possible in Osu, with some minor visual defects. But really, you don't even have to set it up exactly like a piano skin. Just a simple overlap and maybe different column sizes between the upper and lower keys. With the keybinds, you're already going to have them set up in this sort of style, so going the extra step of setting up the skin like this as well just makes intuitive sense to me. If you're interested in some skinning systems that don't have as many limitations as Osu, I would highly recommend taking a look at SoundSphere. It uses Lua, so kinda similar to what you'd see in Step Mania and Eterna. It's basically programming, but you can literally change any aspect of a note skin, rearrange the key order, and have the scratch lanes be separate from the playfield. No limitations on sizes or overlapping. Really advantageous for key modes greater than 10. While Osu does have annoying skin restrictions, it does keep everything relatively simple, and a lot of it comes down to just adding images with the correct name. Very simple and easy for most non-programmers to quickly modify a few aspects. With SoundSphere, you really have to be meticulous and add every single detail of what exactly you want to skin. One small mistake and the game won't even load. So there's definitely pros and cons when it comes to how in-depth games decide to let their customizations be. But either way, the limitations with column sizes and spacing is something that could be easily fixed within Laser and wouldn't require the implementation of a whole programming language. Anyway, I hope you learned something from this video. While column space modifying can create interesting and unique visual experiences for the player, it really is this niche thing that can only be applicable in specific circumstances. It also comes at the cost of note sizes, visual clutter, and the entire skill curve of playing through maps like this. Honestly, if you're mostly a 4 key, 7 key, or even a 10 key player, there's no real reason to even consider trying to overlap the columns, as there will be plenty of screen real estate for the smaller key modes, even with relatively large column sizes. Leave a comment below if you have any additional skinning concepts you'd like to share, or if there's details about overlap skins I might have missed out on.